Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a film that doesn't shout, doesn't explode, and doesn't rely on spectacle, but somehow still hits harder than most big-budget movies. Captain Fantastic is one of those rare films that quietly walks into your mind and refuses to leave. I remember watching it for the first time and feeling uncomfortable, inspired, confused, and oddly emotional all at once. It's not just a story about a father and his children. It's a question thrown directly at us about how we live, what we value, and whether the world we call normal is actually healthy at all. This movie doesn't give easy answers, and that's exactly why it works. Ben Cash lives far away from cities, highways, and shopping malls, deep in the forests of Washington state, where he and his wife Leslie chose to raise their 6 children, completely isolated from mainstream society. Not because they were forced to, but because they believed modern life was broken at its core, poisoned by capitalism, blind obedience, and intellectual laziness. So instead of schools, they built their own classroom out of nature, philosophy, and discipline, teaching their children to hunt, climb, read complex political theory, debate moral questions, and survive without relying on systems they viewed as corrupt, creating a household where celebrating Noam Chomsky's birthday replaces Christmas, and physical endurance is valued just as much as intellectual growth. Yet despite how impressive and sharp the children are, there's an invisible gap between them and the rest of the world. A gap that only becomes painfully obvious when tragedy strikes and Leslie, who had been hospitalized far away for bipolar disorder, dies by suicide, forcing Ben to confront the very society he spent a decade rejecting. As Leslie's wealthy and traditional parents plan a Christian burial that directly contradicts her Buddhist beliefs and final wishes, and when her father Jack forbids Ben from attending the funeral under threat of arrest, it creates the first major crack in Ben's carefully constructed worldview. Because for the first time, his ideals collide with reality in a way that can't be debated away or solved through survival skills, pushing him into a difficult choice between protecting his children from a system he despises and honoring the woman he loved, leading him to load his kids into a repurposed school bus and drive across the country on a journey that slowly exposes the strengths and failures of his parenting, especially when they stop at his sister Harper's house, and the contrast between the two families becomes impossible to ignore, as Ben confidently demonstrates his children's advanced knowledge, while simultaneously revealing their social awkwardness and emotional isolation, planting the seed that intelligence alone may not be enough to prepare someone for the real world. A doubt that grows stronger when Ben finally arrives at the funeral uninvited, reads Leslie's will, aloud in a desperate attempt to force her family to respect her wishes, and is physically removed from the church, a moment that marks a turning point, not just for him, but for his children, who for the first time openly question whether their father's rigid ideals are costing them more than they re-giving, especially as tensions rise within the family, with Relian accusing Ben of failing his mother during her illness, and Bodovan revealing acceptance letters to elite universities, proving that the outside world hasn't rejected them the way Ben feared, but may actually offer opportunities he never considered, slowly transforming the road trip from a mission of defiance into an emotional reckoning about control, freedom, and the thin line between protecting children and trapping them inside one person's philosophy. After Leslie's death, the silence that settles over the forest feels heavier than anything Ben and the children have ever faced before. Life in the wilderness had always been structured, disciplined, and demanding. But grief introduces a new kind of challenge, one that cannot be trained away with physical endurance or intellectual preparation. Ben tries to maintain the daily routines, believing structure will protect his children from emotional collapse. Yet it becomes increasingly clear that no amount of philosophy or survival training can fully shield them from loss. Each child processes the news differently. Some retreat into quiet reflection, others express anger or confusion. Ben, meanwhile, carries a crushing weight of responsibility, questioning whether his ideals and lifestyle choices played a role in Leslie's mental suffering, even as he refuses to abandon the belief system they built together. The tension intensifies when Ben receives a call from Leslie's father, Jack Bertrand, whose worldview could not be more different from Ben's. Jack represents everything Ben rejected: wealth, traditional values, religious conformity, and social status. Jack informs Ben that Leslie will be buried in a Christian ceremony, directly contradicting her wishes as a Buddhist who rejected organized religion. Ben's anger is immediate, but it is restrained by the reality of Jack's power. Jack threatens legal action if Ben attempts to attend the funeral, accusing him of being unstable and unfit to raise children. This confrontation highlights the central conflict of the film: the clash between radical freedom and societal norms, between personal ideology and collective expectations. Initially, Ben decides not to attend the funeral, telling his children that honoring their mother's wishes does not require participating in a ceremony that disrespects her beliefs. However, as the days pass, guilt and doubt creep in. The children begin to question whether avoiding the funeral is truly an act of respect, or simply fear disguised as principle. This internal struggle reaches a breaking point when Ben realizes that shielding his children from the outside world may also mean denying them the chance to face pain directly. In a moment of resolve, he changes his mind and announces that they will travel to New Mexico to say goodbye to Leslie properly, regardless of Jack's threats. The journey itself marks a significant turning point. The family's old school bus, repurposed as a mobile home, becomes a symbol of their unconventional life colliding with mainstream America. As they leave the wilderness behind, the children encounter ordinary society in a way they never have before. Fast food restaurants, highways, gas stations, and strangers who stare at them with curiosity or discomfort. These interactions expose both the strengths and weaknesses of Ben's parenting. While the children are intellectually advanced and deeply self-aware, they struggle with basic social norms, revealing the cost of their isolation. During a stop at Ben's sister Harper's home, the contrast becomes even more pronounced. Harper and her husband represent a more conventional, middle-class lifestyle, complete with suburban comforts and formal education. Harper expresses concern about the children's upbringing, arguing that intelligence alone does not prepare them for life in the real world. Ben responds by challenging Harper's assumptions, demonstrating that his children possess a deeper understanding of history, politics, and critical thinking than her own. This scene powerfully questions what it truly means to be educated, suggesting that memorization and conformity may be less valuable than curiosity and independent thought. Despite this intellectual victory, cracks begin to form within Ben's family. His eldest son, Bodovan, reveals that he has been accepted into multiple prestigious universities, applications Leslie secretly helped him submit. This revelation shocks Ben, forcing him to confront the possibility that his children may want futures beyond the life he designed for them. For the first time, Ben realizes that his vision of freedom may also be a form of control, limiting his children's ability to choose their own paths. When the family finally arrives at the funeral, the emotional stakes reach their peak. Ben defies Jack openly by entering the church and reading Leslie's will aloud, exposing her final wishes in front of everyone. The moment is both powerful and humiliating, as Jack has been forcibly removed, reinforcing his authority and social dominance. The children watch helplessly, torn between loyalty to their father and fear of losing stability altogether. This humiliation marks a critical shift. Ben's moral certainty begins to crumble, replaced by the realization that righteousness does not always translate into practical victory. By the end of this section, the road trip has transformed from a mission of defiance into a journey of self-examination. Ben's confidence in his role as a father is shaken, and the children begin to question whether the life they've known is truly sustainable. What started as a quest to honor Leslie becomes something far more complex: a confrontation with grief, identity, and the cost of living outside the system. The family is no longer united by unquestioned belief, but by shared uncertainty, setting the stage for deeper conflicts and emotional growth in the chapters ahead. The fallout from the funeral incident lingers heavily as the family retreats back into the anonymity of the road. The bus moves forward, but emotionally, everyone feels stuck between two worlds. Ben tries to reassert authority, reminding the children why they live the way they do. Yet his words no longer carry the same certainty. Relayan, the most openly rebellious of the children, begins to voice resentment that has been building quietly for years. He accuses Ben of turning their lives into an experiment, suggesting that Leslie's suffering was ignored because it did not fit into Ben's philosophy of strength and resilience. These accusations strike deeper than any external criticism Ben has faced before, because they come from his own child. Echoing doubts Ben has been unwilling to confront himself. As tensions rise, Ben struggles to maintain emotional balance. He attempts to intellectualize grief, framing it as a natural process that must be confronted logically rather than emotionally. However, this approach only widens the gap between him and the children, who are now craving reassurance rather than instruction. The wilderness once gave Ben confidence and control, but on the road, surrounded by a society he rejects, his authority begins to feel fragile. His children no longer see him as an infallible guide, but as a flawed human being capable of mistakes, denial, and fear. Relian's frustration ultimately pushes him to run away to his grandparents' house, seeking stability and comfort, rather than ideological purity. When Ben discovers Relian's absence, panic replaces pride. The decision to retrieve his son forces Ben to confront Jack once again, but this time the power dynamic has shifted. Jack is no longer simply a symbolic antagonist. He now holds legal leverage and emotional influence over one of Ben's children. Their confrontation is brutal and deeply personal. Jack accuses Ben of child abuse, claiming that his radical lifestyle has endangered the children's physical and mental well-being. Ben, exhausted and emotionally raw, struggles to defend himself convincingly, realizing that passion alone cannot counter societal authority. When Ben attempts to extract Relian from Jack's home, through a poorly planned maneuver involving his older children, the consequences are immediate and terrifying. One of the daughters falls from the roof while trying to help Relian escape, narrowly avoiding fatal injury. The incident marks a breaking point for Ben. Sitting in the hospital, faced with the possibility of losing another family member, he finally confronts the reality that his idealism may have crossed into recklessness. For the first time, he admits, at least internally, that his belief in total independence has placed his children in genuine danger. This moment of clarity leads to a painful decision. Ben agrees to relinquish custody temporarily, allowing Jack to take the children into his care. The choice devastates him, not because he believes Jack is right, but because he recognizes that love sometimes requires surrender rather than resistance. As Ben drives away alone in the bus, the emptiness inside mirrors the vastness of the road ahead. Without his children, the lifestyle he fought so fiercely to protect suddenly feels meaningless, stripped of purpose and joy. Yet the children's experience with their grandparents quickly reveals the limitations of conventional comfort. Surrounded by luxury, routine schooling, and social norms, they find themselves suffocating rather than secure. Their intelligence is stifled, their curiosity restrained, and their individuality reduced to something that must be corrected. In contrast to Ben's demanding but engaging upbringing, this environment feels shallow and restrictive. Slowly, the children begin to recognize that while their father's methods were flawed, his intentions were rooted in respect, growth, and freedom of thought. In a decisive act of unity, the children secretly escape and reunite with Ben, choosing him not as a flawless leader, but as a parent willing to learn and evolve. Their reunion is not triumphant, but reflective, grounded in mutual understanding rather than blind loyalty. Ben, humbled by loss and failure, begins to listen rather than lecture. He acknowledges his mistakes openly, admitting that strength does not mean isolation, and independence does not require rejecting the world entirely. The family's final act to honor Leslie's true wishes becomes a healing ritual rather than an act of rebellion. By cremating her body and performing a private ceremony, they reclaim agency over grief without denying reality. This moment represents a synthesis of their values, respect for individuality combined with emotional accountability. When Bodovan chooses to leave and explore the world on his own terms, Ben supports him, recognizing that true freedom includes the courage to let go. By the end of this section, the family emerges transformed. They no longer exist in opposition to society, nor do they surrender to it completely. Instead, they redefine what balance looks like: education alongside structure, independence alongside connection, and ideology tempered by empathy. Ben is no longer the unyielding architect of his children's lives, but a father willing to grow alongside them. The journey that began as an escape from the world concludes as a reconciliation with it, setting the foundation for a quieter, wiser future, built not on extremes, but on understanding. Life begins to settle into a quieter rhythm after the family's emotional reunion, but the calm is layered with reflection rather than comfort. Ben understands that returning to the wilderness exactly as before would mean repeating the same mistakes, yet fully integrating into mainstream society feels equally wrong. This internal conflict shapes his actions as the family searches for a new way forward, one that preserves their values without isolating them from reality. The children, having tasted both extremes, are more perceptive now. They no longer see the world in absolutes. Instead, they question, compare, and analyze. Applying the critical thinking Ben taught them in ways he never fully anticipated, Ben begins to adjust their daily life in subtle but meaningful ways. He introduces structure without rigidity, allowing the children more autonomy in decisions while still guiding them. Education becomes less about proving superiority and more about curiosity and engagement. Rather than rejecting formal learning entirely, Ben acknowledges its potential value when balanced with independent thought. This evolution marks a profound shift in his character. He is no longer driven solely by opposition to the system, but by a desire to prepare his children to navigate it intelligently. Meanwhile, The emotional absence left by Leslie continues to shape every interaction. Her memory no longer feels like a source of anger or rebellion, but one of quiet influence. The children speak of her openly now, sharing stories and reflections that allow grief to become a shared experience rather than an individual burden. Ben, too, begins to process his guilt more honestly. He recognizes that loving someone deeply does not guarantee understanding their pain, and that ideals can sometimes blind even the most devoted partner. This acceptance does not absolve him, but it allows healing to begin. Bodivon's decision to leave for Namibia becomes a turning point not just for him, but for the entire family. His departure symbolizes the ultimate success and limitation of Ben's parenting. Bodivon is independent, capable, and intellectually confident. Yet his choice to explore the world alone highlights a truth Ben can no longer ignore. Raising strong children means accepting that they will one day walk paths beyond their parents' control. Supporting Bodivon's decision becomes Ben's quiet redemption, a moment where love outweighs ideology. As the remaining children adjust to a more grounded routine, the family establishes a modest home closer to society. Mornings are simpler now, breakfast at a table, school preparation, shared responsibilities that resemble conventional life more than Ben once thought possible. Yet beneath this simplicity lies a foundation unlike any other families. Discussions are still rich with philosophy, ethics, and self-examination. Physical discipline remains important, but no longer defines their worth. Survival skills coexist with emotional awareness, creating a balance that once seemed impossible. Ben himself undergoes the most significant transformation. Stripped of the illusion that he alone holds the answers, he embraces vulnerability as a form of strength. He listens more than he speaks, questions his own assumptions, and allows the children to challenge him without fear. This shift does not weaken his authority, it humanizes it. The children respond, not with rebellion, but with trust, recognizing that leadership rooted in humility is far more powerful than control enforced by certainty. By the end of this phase, the family is no longer defined by isolation or defiance. They exist in a space between ideals and reality, forging a life that reflects growth rather than resistance. The wilderness taught them survival, society taught them connection, and loss taught them empathy. Together, these lessons shape a future that honors their past without being imprisoned by it. The journey is not portrayed as a victory over the world, but as a reconciliation, with a TTA reminder that true freedom lies not in rejecting society entirely, but in choosing how to engage with it on one's own terms. As time moves forward, the family's new lifestyle begins to reveal both its strengths and its hidden challenges, forcing each member to confront questions they had never needed to ask before. The children, now attending school and interacting regularly with others their age, experience moments of excitement mixed with discomfort. They quickly realize that intelligence alone does not guarantee belonging. Social rules, unspoken expectations, and emotional subtleties are far more complex than any book Ben ever assigned them. Watching his children struggle in these unfamiliar spaces is painful for Ben, but it also reinforces an important truth he is slowly learning to accept: protection cannot replace preparation. Ben becomes increasingly aware that his parenting philosophy, while rooted in love and intention, was shaped by fear of conformity, fear of corruption, fear of losing authenticity. Now, those fears surface in quieter, more personal ways. He notices how his children hesitate before speaking in class, how they analyze jokes instead of laughing naturally, how they question emotions instead of feeling them freely. These observations do not invalidate the life he gave them, but they expose its limits. For the first time, Ben allows himself to admit that survival skills and intellectual rigor are only parts of what it means to be fully human. The absence of Leslie continues to act as an emotional undercurrent, influencing Ben's decisions, even when he tries to ignore it. He reflects on moments from their past conversations about raising children, disagreements about balance, warnings he dismissed as compromises of principle. These memories no longer feel accusatory. Instead, they function like gentle reminders urging him toward growth. Ben begins to see that Leslie's wish for the children was never about rejecting society completely, but about ensuring they never lost themselves within it. Meanwhile, the younger children adapt faster than Ben expects. Their curiosity allows them to absorb new experiences without the burden of ideology. They make friends, ask innocent questions, and approach unfamiliar situations with openness rather than resistance. This adaptability both reassures and unsettles Ben. It reassures him because it proves his children are resilient. It unsettles him because it means they may not always choose the life he once believed was unquestionably superior. Religion, in particular, becomes a mirror for Ben's unresolved guilt. His earlier anger has softened, but his skepticism remains. He challenges Ben not with rebellion, but with logic, pointing out inconsistencies between what Ben teaches and how he lives now. These conversations are difficult, yet they mark a turning point. Instead of asserting authority, Ben listens. He acknowledges mistakes without excuses, creating a space where honesty replaces hierarchy. This shift deepens their bond, transforming conflict into understanding. The family's routines slowly stabilize. Evenings are spent discussing daily experiences, rather than abstract theories. Physical training becomes optional, chosen rather than enforced. Meals are shared without lectures, filled instead with stories, humor, and reflection. These small changes signify a major transformation. Discipline is no longer used to shape identity, but to support growth. Ben realizes that true strength lies not in resistance, but in adaptability. As this phase of their journey unfolds, the family stands at a crossroads between who they were and who they are becoming. The wilderness no longer defines them, yet its lessons remain embedded in their values. Society no longer feels like an enemy, yet it is not blindly embraced. Instead, the family learns to exist in a space of intentional choice, where values are lived rather than defended. This balance does not come easily, but it feels honest, and for the first time since Leslie's death, Ben senses that they are moving forward, not out of necessity, but out of understanding. As weeks pass, the reality of their reintegration begins to settle in more deeply, and the initial novelty of a structured life gives way to quieter, more complex emotions. Ben finds himself navigating a role he never trained for, guiding his children through emotional uncertainty rather than physical hardship. The challenges they now face cannot be solved with endurance or logic alone. Feelings of isolation, moments of self-doubt, and questions about identity surface during ordinary routines on school mornings, at dinner tables, and during late-night conversations. Ben starts to realize that the world he once rejected is not inherently destructive. Instead, it demands emotional literacy, patience, and compromise, skills he himself is still learning. The children begin to form individual paths within this new environment. Some embrace structure, finding comfort in predictability, while others struggle with conformity and expectations. Ben watches closely, fighting the urge to interfere or correct. His instinct has always been to teach, to shape outcomes, but now he understands that growth requires space. This restraint is difficult, especially when he sees confusion in their eyes or frustration in their silence. Yet every time he steps back, instead of stepping in, he notices small victories: confidence emerging naturally, curiosity replacing resistance. Leslie's absence continues to influence the family in subtle but powerful ways. Ben speaks of her more openly now, not as an idealized memory, but as a complex person who struggled, loved fiercely, and believed deeply in balance. These conversations allowed the children to process their grief without fear of betraying their father's ideals. Ben's internal conflict intensifies as he confronts the contradiction between his beliefs and his current reality. He once defined success as independence from society. Now he measures it by his children's ability to navigate society without losing their integrity. This shift forces him to confront his own rigidity. He acknowledges that ideology, when left unquestioned, can become another form of confinement. This realization does not weaken him, it humanizes him. The family begins creating new traditions that reflect both worlds they have known. Physical training becomes a shared activity rather than a test of worth. Education expands beyond books to include emotional expression, collaboration, and empathy. Discussions are no longer debates to be won, but conversations meant to be understood. In these moments, Ben recognizes a truth that once terrified him. Leadership does not require absolute certainty. It requires humility. As the family continues to adjust, they encounter external judgment, curiosity from neighbors, assumptions from teachers, quiet skepticism from other parents. Instead of responding defensively, Ben chooses transparency. He explains their past honestly, without romanticizing or apologizing. This openness disarms criticism and invites understanding, reinforcing a lesson he now lives by rather than teaches. Authenticity is strongest when it does not demand validation. By the end of this phase, the family is no longer defined by transition. They are actively building a life that integrates resilience with vulnerability, discipline with compassion, independence with connection. Ben no longer sees adaptation as surrender. Instead, he understands it as evolution, a necessary step toward becoming not just survivors of circumstance, but participants in a shared world. And in this realization, he begins to forgive himself for the past, allowing the future to unfold without fear. Time begins to reshape the family's sense of belonging, not by erasing the past, but by layering new meaning over it. The children grow more comfortable navigating public spaces, learning the unspoken rules of interaction that once felt artificial and restrictive. Simple experiences grew projects at school, casual friendships, even disagreements become lessons in adaptability. Ben observes these changes with a mix of pride and quiet anxiety. He sees how quickly his children absorb new norms, and part of him fears that the values he worked so hard to instill might fade under social pressure. Yet, he also notices that their moral compass remains intact. They question authority respectfully, think critically, and show empathy in ways that distinguish them without isolating them. Ben's role continues to evolve as he shifts from architect of their worldview to steward of their independence. He realizes that strength no longer lies in controlling outcomes, but in trusting the foundation he has already built. This trust is tested when one of the younger children challenges him openly, questioning why they must balance between two worlds instead of fully committing to one. The question unsettles Ben because it mirrors his own internal conflict. He responds not with certainty, but honesty, admitting that he is still learning where that balance lies. This vulnerability deepens their relationship, redefining authority as guidance rather than command. The emotional weight of Leslie's death resurfaces in unexpected ways. A school assignment about family history forces the children to confront how they present their story to others. Writing about their mother becomes an act of courage rather than grief alone. Ben supports them without steering their narratives, allowing each child to honor Leslie in their own voice. Through these stories, Leslie becomes more than a tragic absence. She becomes a source of resilience, reminding them that love does not disappear when someone is gone, it transforms. Ben's interactions with the outside world grow more nuanced as well. He begins to engage in conversations he once avoided, not to defend his philosophy, but to listen. Teachers, neighbors, and other parents offer perspectives that challenge his assumptions without threatening his identity. These exchanges reveal a truth Ben resisted for years. Connection does not require ideological alignment. Mutual respect can exist without compromise of self. This realization allows him to lower his defenses and participate more fully in the community. As routines settle, moments of reflection surface during quieter hours. Ben revisits the choices he made during their years of isolation, acknowledging both their necessity and their cost. He no longer frames those years as an act of rebellion, but as a response to fear of losing Leslie, fear of societal harm, fear of inadequacy. Recognizing this does not diminish the value of their past, it reframes it with compassion. Ben learns that growth requires accountability, not guilt. The children, sensing this shift, begin to see their father not as an infallible leader, but as a human navigating uncertainty alongside them. This shared vulnerability strengthens their bond. Conversations become more collaborative, decisions more inclusive. The family dynamic transforms from hierarchy to partnership, reinforcing a sense of unity grounded in mutual trust rather than authority. External challenges continue to arise: moments of misunderstanding, subtle discrimination, and systemic limitations, but the family faces them together. Instead of retreating or resisting, they adapt strategically, choosing when to assert themselves and when to compromise. This balance becomes their greatest strength. They are no longer defined by opposition to society, nor by assimilation into it. They exist in a space shaped by intention rather than reaction. As this chapter closes, Ben recognizes a profound shift within himself. He no longer measures success by how different they are from others, but by how authentically they live within shared spaces. The wilderness once taught them survival. Society now teaches them coexistence. Both lessons are essential, and neither invalidates the other. In accepting this duality, Ben finds peace not as resolution, but as readiness for whatever comes next. As time progresses, the family begins to experience moments that feel quietly ordinary. Yet these moments carry immense significance because they represent stability rather than survival. The children start forming deeper friendships, learning not only how to exist among others, but how to care for them. Emotional intelligence, once cultivated through philosophy and debate, now grows through lived experience, comforting a friend, navigating jealousy, handling disappointment. Ben notices that these social lessons teach empathy in ways books never could. Instead of resisting these changes, he begins to see them as extensions of the values he always hoped to instill. Ben's internal transformation becomes more visible in his daily behavior. He loosens rigid routines, allowing space for spontaneity and personal choice. Meals become conversations rather than lessons, and disagreements are treated as opportunities for understanding instead of correction. This shift creates a sense of emotional safety within the family. The children feel heard not because they echo their father's beliefs, but because their thoughts are respected, regardless of alignment. Authority evolves into mentorship, and guidance replaces instruction. The outside world continues to test their adaptability. Exposure to consumer culture, peer pressure, and social hierarchies presents moral dilemmas that cannot be solved with ideology alone. One child struggles with envy after witnessing the comfort and privilege of classmates, questioning whether rejecting materialism truly leads to fulfillment. Ben resists giving a direct answer, choosing instead to explore the question together. Through dialogue, the family learns that values are not absolute shields but tools for reflection. Wanting comfort does not negate integrity, just as rejecting excess does not guarantee virtue. Grief resurfaces subtly, woven into moments of happiness rather than sorrow. Leslie's absence becomes most noticeable during achievements she would have celebrated. The children speak of her more freely now, not with pain but with affection. Ben allows himself to mourn openly, recognizing that strength does not require emotional silence. This openness deepens the children's trust, teaching them that vulnerability is not weakness but courage. Ben's relationship with the broader community grows more grounded. He begins to contribute rather than observe, offering his skills and knowledge without imposing his worldview. Through small acts, helping with local projects, participating in discussions, he finds purpose beyond his role as a father. This participation affirms that meaningful change does not require isolation. It requires engagement. For the first time, Ben feels connected to society without feeling compromised by it. The children, observing this balance, begin to imagine futures that blend independence with connection. They speak about careers, travel, and personal aspirations without fear of disappointing their father. Ben listens without judgment, understanding that preparation for life means accepting uncertainty. His pride shifts from their intellectual achievements to their emotional growth, recognizing that resilience is built through choice rather than control. Conflict inevitably arises, but it no longer threatens their unity. Disagreements are met with patience, misunderstandings with dialogue. The family learns to pause rather than react, to reflect rather than resist. This emotional maturity becomes their strongest defense against external pressures. They are no longer defined by how differently they live, but by how intentionally they live. As this phase of their journey settles, Ben recognizes that his greatest achievement is not raising children who challenge the world, but raising children who can navigate it with compassion and confidence. The wilderness taught them self-reliance. Society teaches them coexistence. Together, these lessons form a complete education, one rooted in thought, empathy, and choice. The family moves forward, not as rebels or conformists, but as individuals grounded in purpose, ready for the final transformations that lie ahead. As the months continue to unfold, the family's sense of identity becomes less about where they live and more about how they choose to live. The children no longer feel like outsiders observing society from a distance. Instead, they engage with it critically, yet compassionately. School experiences challenge them in unexpected ways, not academically, but emotionally. Competition, comparison, and social labeling create pressures they were never trained for, and each child responds differently. Some adapt quickly, others struggle quietly, and Ben learns that resilience is not uniform. It cannot be taught through drills or philosophy alone. It must be nurtured through patience and reassurance. Ben becomes more reflective, often questioning the rigid ideals that once defined his parenting. He begins to understand that shielding his children from discomfort was never the goal, preparing them to face it was. When one of the younger children experiences rejection from peers, Ben resists the urge to frame it as societal failure. Instead, he sits beside them, acknowledging the pain without explanation or justification. This moment marks a profound shift. Ben no longer feels compelled to interpret every hardship as a lesson. Sometimes, presence is enough. The family's dynamic subtly evolves as independence increases. The children begin making choices that do not require approval, and while this initially unsettles Ben, he recognizes it as growth rather than rebellion. Trust replaces supervision. Mistakes are allowed to exist without immediate correction. This freedom strengthens their confidence, teaching them accountability, not through fear, but through understanding consequences. The household becomes less structured, yet more emotionally balanced. Ben's memories of Leslie grow sharper during this period of transition. He reflects on their shared dreams and how reality diverged from expectation. Where he once blamed himself for not saving her, he now acknowledges the limits of control. Accepting that love does not always prevent loss allows him to release years of silent guilt. He speaks openly about Leslie with the children, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a reminder of love that continues to influence their lives. This shared remembrance creates a sense of continuity, binding past and present. Outside influences continue to test the family's values. Media, technology, and consumer desire creep into their daily routines, not as enemies, but as unavoidable realities. Instead of banning them outright, Ben encourages discussion. The children analyze advertisements, question social narratives, and explore how desire is constructed. This critical engagement empowers them far more than isolation ever did. They learn that awareness is a stronger defense than avoidance. Ben's role shifts further from leader to observer. He watches his children negotiate their identities, recognizing pieces of himself, Leslie, and entirely new elements emerging within them. This realization humbles him. Parenthood, he learns, is not about replication but cultivation. Each child carries unique strengths and vulnerabilities, and success lies in allowing those differences to flourish, rather than forcing alignment. Moments of doubt still surface, particularly during quiet nights, when Ben wonders whether he waited too long to adapt or changed too late. Yet these doubts no longer paralyze him. They coexist with hope, forming a balanced perspective rooted in acceptance rather than certainty. The family's journey has taught him that perfection is an illusion, but intention matters deeply. As this chapter closes, the family feels less defined by their unconventional past and more by their intentional present. They are not fully integrated, nor are they isolated. They exist somewhere in between, a space of conscious choice. This balance prepares them for the final stages of their transformation, where the future will demand decisions not just about survival or values, but about belonging, legacy, and what it truly means to live well. After the emotional reconciliation that pulls the children back into Ben's orbit, the story begins to slow down in a way that feels deliberate rather than lazy, allowing the weight of everything that has happened to finally settle in. Ben, who has spent most of the journey defending his choices with absolute confidence, is now visibly quieter, more reflective, almost fragile, in a way we have not seen before. He no longer lectures constantly, no longer corrects every misconception with sharp precision. Instead, he listens. This shift is important because it shows that the road trip was not just about defying society or honoring Leslie's wishes, but about forcing Ben himself to confront the possibility that love alone is not enough if it blinds you to reality. The children, now reunited with their father, are also changed. They are still intelligent, still curious, still deeply bonded to one another, but they are no longer unquestioningly loyal. Each of them carries a new awareness of danger, responsibility, and consequence. The near-fatal accident involving Vespia hangs heavily over them, acting as a silent reminder that ideals can be deadly when taken too far. As they continue traveling together, the family dynamic becomes less about authority and more about collaboration, with Ben finally acknowledging that his children's voices matter just as much as his own. This evolution reaches a crucial moment when they collectively decide to fulfill Leslie's final wish in the exact way she wanted. Not as an act of rebellion against Jack, but as an act of love and closure. The exhumation of Leslie's body is presented without shock value or sensationalism. Instead, it feels solemn, almost ritualistic, reinforcing the idea that death, in this family's worldview, is not something to fear or hide from, but something to face honestly. The cremation by the ocean is one of the film's most quietly powerful sequences, stripped of grand speeches or dramatic music, relying instead on the rawness of the moment. The children sing, their voices uneven but sincere, transforming grief into something communal rather than isolating. For Ben, this act becomes the final step in accepting that Leslie is truly gone, and that he can no longer live, as if she is still silently guiding every decision he makes. The flushing of the ashes, which could have easily come across as disrespectful or absurd, instead feels oddly tender, because it is exactly what Leslie wanted, a final rejection of convention, and a reminder that meaning is something you choose, not something handed down by tradition. After this cathartic release, the family's future begins to take shape in a way that feels grounded, rather than idealistic. Bo Davin's decision to leave and travel on his own is handled without melodrama, emphasizing that independence does not have to mean separation or abandonment. Ben's reaction to his son's departure is especially telling. Instead of guilt-tripping or ideological lecturing, he offers support, recognizing that true education includes letting go. This moment underscores the film's central argument that freedom is not about isolation from society, but about the ability to choose your own path with awareness and accountability. The final scenes show the family settling into a new version of life that blends their values with a more structured reality. The children attending school does not feel like a betrayal of their upbringing, but rather an expansion of it, a chance to test their knowledge and beliefs against the outside world. Ben cooking breakfast in a modest home, watching his children prepare for a school bus instead of a survival drill, is quietly symbolic, representing a compromise that does not erase who they are but allows them to adapt. The film does not present this ending as perfect or definitive. Instead, it leaves room for uncertainty, acknowledging that balance is an ongoing process rather than a final destination. What makes this conclusion resonate is its refusal to label Ben as either a hero or a villain. He is portrayed as a deeply flawed man who loved his family fiercely but allowed his fear of the world to shape that love into something restrictive. By the end, he has not abandoned his beliefs, but he has softened them, recognizing that survival is not just about physical strength or intellectual rigor, but emotional resilience and adaptability. The children, to emerge not as products of an experiment gone wrong, but as individuals shaped by both extraordinary freedom and profound loss. Their journey suggests that there is value in questioning societal norms, but also danger in rejecting them entirely. Ultimately, the film closes on a note that feels honest rather than comforting, reminding the audience that parenting, like life itself, is an imperfect balancing act between protection and trust, guidance and independence. It invites viewers to reflect on their own assumptions about success, happiness, and what it truly means to prepare someone for the world, not by shielding them from its flaws, but by giving them the tools to face it with curiosity, compassion, and courage. The transition into this new phase of life is not immediate or effortless, and that is where the story finds its quiet tension. In the small, everyday moments that reveal how deeply the family has been shaped by their years of isolation. Ben wakes earlier than the children now, no longer because survival demands it, but because his mind refuses to rest. He prepares breakfast with the same care he once reserved for hunting or training exercises. Yet there is an unfamiliar stillness to his movements. The kitchen, modest and ordinary, feels almost alien compared to the vast wilderness they once called home. The children sit around the table, their conversations shifting between excitement and uncertainty, discussing school schedules, subjects, and classmates with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. For them, this environment is both an opportunity and a challenge, a space where their intelligence is no longer exceptional, but simply different. Ben watches them closely, resisting the urge to intervene or instruct, forcing himself to trust that they can navigate this world without his constant guidance. This restraint is perhaps the hardest lesson he has had to learn, harder even than confronting Leslie's death. As the days pass, cracks begin to show in the idealized notion that integration will be smooth. The children encounter misunderstanding and judgment, their blunt honesty and unconventional knowledge often met with confusion or mockery. Yet, instead of reacting with defensiveness or disdain, they begin to adapt, learning when to speak and when to listen, when to challenge and when to observe. Ben notices these changes with a mixture of pride and sadness, realizing that growth inevitably comes with distance, that every step toward independence carries them slightly further from him. His relationship with each child evolves in subtle ways, no longer defined by rigid roles, but by mutual respect. Conversations become less about lessons and more about shared reflections, with Ben admitting when he does not have all the answers. This vulnerability strengthens their bond, transforming authority into partnership. Meanwhile, the absence of Baudouin is felt deeply, his departure serving as a constant reminder that this family, once tightly sealed against the outside world, is now open and porous. Letters from him arrive sporadically, filled with observations about different cultures, people, and philosophies, echoing the intellectual curiosity that Leslie and Ben instilled in him. These letters reassure Ben that letting go was not a mistake, that freedom can coexist with connection. At the same time, Ben struggles privately with guilt, questioning whether his choices delayed his children, his ability to function independently, or gave them a foundation stronger than any conventional upbringing could provide. This internal conflict is mirrored in his interactions with other adults, particularly teachers and parents, who view him with suspicion or fascination. Ben learns to navigate these encounters without confrontation, recognizing that convincing others of his worldview is no longer necessary. What matters is the well-being of his children, not the validation of his ideology. The film's focus during this stage shifts from dramatic events to emotional nuance, emphasizing that the aftermath of trauma is rarely explosive but instead unfolds through routine, memory, and adjustment. Leslie's presence lingers in unexpected ways, In music, the children hum absent-mindedly, in philosophical debates that arise over dinner, in moments of laughter that feel almost guilty in their brightness. Ben gradually understands that honoring Leslie does not mean freezing the family in the moment of her ideals, but allowing those ideals to evolve alongside them. This realization becomes especially clear when he attends a school meeting and listens rather than speaks, absorbing perspectives that challenge his own without feeling threatened. The act of listening, once foreign to him in institutional settings, becomes a form of growth as significant as any survival skill he ever taught the children to begin to reinterpret their past, acknowledging both the beauty and the limitations of their upbringing. They recognize that the wilderness gave them resilience and clarity, but also that isolation denied them certain social tools they are now learning to build. By the end of this segment, the family has not achieved a perfect balance, but they have found momentum, a sense that movement itself is a form of healing. Ben no longer views society as an enemy to be resisted, nor does he surrender entirely to its norms. Instead, he exists in a space between critique and participation, teaching his children not through rebellion, but through example. The narrative emphasizes that true strength lies not in rejecting the world outright, but in engaging with it thoughtfully, retaining one's values while remaining open to change. This stage of the journey feels less like a conclusion and more like a continuation, suggesting that the story of this family does not end with resolution, but with the courage to keep adapting, learning, and loving in a world that is far messier and more unpredictable than any wilderness they ever faced together. As time continues to move forward, the family's new routine begins to settle into something that resembles stability, though it remains fragile and constantly evolving. The novelty of integration fades, replaced by the quieter challenges of consistency. School is no longer an abstract concept but a daily reality, complete with deadlines, social hierarchies, and expectations that cannot be reasoned away through philosophy alone. The younger children adapt faster than Ben anticipated, absorbing new information with the same hunger they once applied to books and survival manuals. Their minds remain sharp, but now they are learning an entirely different language, the unspoken rules of society. Ben observes this transformation from a careful distance, torn between pride and unease. He recognizes that these lessons, though necessary, are not ones he can teach. Instead, he must trust systems he once openly rejected. This surrender is not passive. It is an active choice to prioritize his children's growth over his own certainty. Ben's internal struggle becomes more pronounced as he confronts the silence that follows the children's increasing independence. Moments that were once filled with debate, training, or storytelling, now stretch quietly, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The absence of constant responsibility forces him to confront his grief more directly. Leslie's death, once compartmentalized by urgency and conflict, resurfaces in unexpected ways. Ben finds himself revisiting old memories, not as philosophical exercises, but as emotional experiences, feeling the weight of what was lost, rather than analyzing it. This shift marks a crucial turning point in his character, as he allows himself to mourn without justification or intellectualization. Grief, he realizes, does not weaken his values. It deepens his understanding of them. The children, meanwhile, begin to redefine their identities. Outside the framework of their father's ideology, they experiment with self-expression, testing boundaries that feel trivial on the surface but represent profound change. Clothing choices, music preferences, and friendships become new territories of exploration. While Ben initially struggles to accept these shifts, he gradually recognizes them as extensions of the freedom he always claimed to support. True autonomy, he learns, means accepting outcomes that do not mirror his expectations. This lesson is especially evident in his relationship with Reliane, whose skepticism toward their upbringing has not entirely faded. Their conversations remain tense but honest, reflecting a mutual desire for understanding rather than control. Through these exchanges, Ben learns that disagreement does not equate to failure, and that allowing his children to challenge him is perhaps the greatest proof of their critical thinking. The family's connection to their past resurfaces during a visit to the wilderness, a deliberate return, rather than an escape. This journey is not about reclaiming isolation, but about acknowledging its significance. Surrounded by familiar landscapes, the children reflect on what that life gave them and what it took away. The forest no longer feels like a refuge from society, but a place of memory, grounding them in a shared history. Ben approaches this return with humility, resisting the urge to romanticize the past. Instead, he listens as the children articulate their mixed emotions, recognizing that the wilderness was both a sanctuary and a constraint. This acknowledgement allows them to integrate their past without being defined by it. As the days progress, Ben begins to re-engage with the broader community in small but meaningful ways. He attends events, participates in conversations, and even allows himself moments of lightness that once felt indulgent. These interactions challenge his long-held assumptions, revealing that community does not inherently demand conformity. Through observation, rather than opposition, Ben finds spaces where his values can coexist with others, reshaping his understanding of engagement. This evolution is subtle but significant, marking a departure from isolation as a moral stance toward connection as a deliberate choice. The children's academic success brings attention from teachers and administrators, sparking discussions about their future paths. These conversations force Ben to confront questions he once dismissed: higher education, careers, and long-term stability. Rather than reacting defensively, he listens, weighing possibilities with an openness that surprises even him. He recognizes that providing his children with options does not betray his principles, it honors them. Freedom, after all, is meaningless without choice. This realization reframes his role as a parent, shifting from protector and teacher to supporter and guide. Throughout this phase, Leslie's influence continues to resonate, not as an idealized figure but as a presence woven into the family's evolving narrative. Her beliefs, humor, and compassion surface organically, guiding decisions without dictating them. Ben understands now that honoring her means allowing the family to live fully, embracing complexity rather than clinging to absolutes. This understanding brings him a sense of peace that had eluded him since her death. By the end of this segment, the family stands at a crossroads not defined by crisis, but by possibility. They have not abandoned their values, nor have they fully assimilated into conventional life. Instead, they occupy a space shaped by intention and reflection, one that continues to shift as they grow. The film emphasizes that healing is not linear, and that stability is not a fixed destination, but an ongoing practice. Through patience, vulnerability, and mutual respect, Ben and his children learn that resilience is not just about surviving hardship, but about adapting with integrity. This chapter reinforces the story's core message, that love, when grounded in honesty and flexibility, can sustain even the most unconventional journeys. As the story moves deeper into its final stretch, the sense of calm that has slowly formed around the family begins to reveal its true test. Stability, the film suggests, is not proven in moments of peace but in how it responds when uncertainty returns. Ben finds himself increasingly aware that his children are no longer just adapting to the world, they are beginning to imagine futures within it. These futures are personal, distinct, and in some cases, far removed from the life he once envisioned for them. Instead of reacting with fear or resistance, Ben now approaches these realizations with curiosity. He asks questions rather than issuing lectures, listens more than he speaks, and allows silence to replace certainty. This behavioral shift is subtle but profound, marking the clearest evidence yet of his transformation. The children's individuality becomes more pronounced, especially as they articulate their ambitions. Some speak excitedly about academic goals, others about creative pursuits, and a few about lives that prioritize connection and simplicity over achievement. What unites them is not a shared destination, but a shared confidence in their ability to choose. This confidence is the true legacy of their upbringing, and Ben begins to understand that his success as a parent cannot be measured by similarity, but by independence. Watching his children debate, question, and dream, he recognizes reflections of both himself and Leslie not as replicas, but as influences that have shaped their thinking. This realization brings a quiet sense of fulfillment that no ideology could provide. Ben's relationship with authority figures continues to evolve during this phase, particularly in educational and community settings. Meetings that once would have escalated into philosophical confrontations now unfold with mutual respect. Ben no longer feels the need to prove the superiority of his worldview. Instead, he engages in dialogue, finding common ground without surrendering his principles. This balance allows him to advocate effectively for his children, while acknowledging the value of shared structures. The film uses these interactions to illustrate that resistance and cooperation are not mutually exclusive, and that maturity lies in discerning when each is appropriate. At the same time, Ben's grief reaches a quieter, more integrated stage. Leslie's absence is no longer a constant ache, but a presence that shapes moments rather than dominating them. Ben speaks of her more freely, sharing stories with the children that are not lessons or memorials, but memories. Laughter begins to accompany these recollections, signaling a shift from mourning to remembrance. The children, too, find comfort in this openness, realizing that honoring their mother does not require solemnity, but authenticity. This collective healing strengthens their bond, transforming loss into a shared source of resilience rather than division. The family's dynamic is further tested when Ben faces the prospect of personal reinvention. With his children increasingly independent, he confronts the question of who he is beyond fatherhood. This inquiry unsettles him, stripping away roles that once defined his identity. Instead of retreating into isolation, Ben tentatively explores new forms of purpose, whether through work, community involvement, or simple human connection. These steps are portrayed not as dramatic reinventions, but as gradual expansions of self. The film treats this process with tenderness, acknowledging that growth does not end with parenthood, but often begins anew when its intensity shifts. Meanwhile, the children's engagement with the world reveals both strengths and vulnerabilities, shaped by their unconventional upbringing. Their honesty and critical thinking earn admiration, but their lack of social polish sometimes exposes them to misunderstanding. Rather than shielding them, Ben allows these experiences to unfold, trusting their ability to navigate complexity. When conflicts arise, they are addressed through conversation rather than control, reinforcing the family's commitment to communication. These moments highlight the film's belief that preparation for life does not mean eliminating struggle, but fostering the skills needed to face it. The narrative places particular emphasis on choice during this segment, choices about education, relationships, values, and belonging. Ben no longer frames these decisions as ideological battlegrounds, but as personal journeys. This reframing is crucial, as it dismantles the binary thinking that once governed his worldview. Life, the film suggests, is not a series of correct or incorrect paths, but a landscape shaped by intention and consequence. Ben's acceptance of this idea represents the culmination of his internal arc, transforming him from a man defined by resistance into one guided by reflection. As the family prepares for the next phase of their lives, the atmosphere is neither triumphant nor tragic. Instead, it is quietly hopeful, grounded in realism rather than idealism. The children's departure from constant togetherness is acknowledged as both necessary and painful, a natural progression rather than a loss of unity. Ben supports these transitions, not because they align with his beliefs, but because they align with his love. This distinction underscores the film's central message, that parenting is not about shaping outcomes, but about nurturing agency. By the end, the story positions the family at the edge of transformation, aware that change will continue beyond the frame. There are no definitive answers, only ongoing conversations and evolving relationships. The film resists closure in favor of continuity, suggesting that growth is an enduring process rather than a final destination. Through its nuanced portrayal of adaptation, grief, and love, this chapter reinforces the idea that true freedom lies not in isolation or conformity, but in the courage to choose connection without losing oneself. As the story moves closer to its conclusion, the focus subtly shifts from adjustment to sustainability, how the choices made by the family will hold up over time. The film no longer questions whether Ben and his children can survive in the outside world. Instead, it asks whether they can remain emotionally honest while living within it. This distinction is important, because survival was never the real challenge. The true test lies in preserving integrity without becoming rigid, and in finding compromise without losing conviction. Ben, now more self-aware than ever, approaches this stage with humility rather than certainty, recognizing that growth is not a single realization, but a continuous practice. The household routine begins to reflect this balance. Mornings are structured but not strict. Educational responsibilities coexist with personal exploration, and conversations replace commands. The children, once guided almost entirely by their father's philosophy, now contribute equally to shaping their shared life. Their voices carry weight, not as extensions of Ben's beliefs, but as independent perspectives formed through experience. This shift transforms the family dynamic into something more collaborative, where authority is distributed rather than centralized. The film treats this evolution as a quiet success, emphasizing that true leadership often involves learning when to step back. Ben's internal journey remains central during this phase, particularly as he confronts lingering doubts about the past. Moments of reflection reveal that while he no longer blames himself entirely for Leslie's struggles, he has not completely forgiven himself either. These unresolved feelings surface in subtle ways: hesitation in decision-making, moments of silence where certainty once lived, and an increased sensitivity to his children's emotional states. Rather than presenting this as weakness, the narrative frames it as emotional maturity. Ben's willingness to acknowledge unresolved pain without allowing it to dictate his actions illustrates a deeper understanding of responsibility and compassion. The children's paths continue to diverge, each representing a different interpretation of freedom. Some embrace structured education with enthusiasm, finding joy in mastering systems they once viewed skeptically. Others maintain a preference for alternative learning, driven by curiosity rather than credentials. The film avoids privileging one choice over another, instead presenting diversity of direction as the ultimate proof of successful parenting. What matters is not where the children go, but that they move forward with intention and self-awareness. Ben observes these developments with quiet pride, no longer measuring success by ideological alignment. Community interaction becomes more prominent in this part, highlighting how the family integrates without dissolving into conformity. Neighbors, teachers, and peers are no longer portrayed as threats to individuality, but as potential collaborators in growth. Ben's conversations with other adults reflect a softened worldview. He listens more openly, challenges less aggressively, and accepts disagreement without defensiveness. These exchanges reinforce the film's message that ideological purity often isolates, while dialogue fosters understanding. Ben's evolution demonstrates that holding strong beliefs does not require hostility toward those who do not share them. Grief, though no longer overwhelming, remains present in nuanced ways. Leslie's influence is felt through habits, expressions, and shared values that persist without conscious effort. The family's remembrance of her has evolved from ritual to integration, meaning her legacy lives not in acts of defiance, but in everyday kindness and curiosity. This transformation allows the children to carry their mother with them without being anchored to loss. The film presents this process as neither linear nor complete, acknowledging that grief adapts as life expands rather than disappears. Ben's sense of purpose continues to recalibrate as his role shifts. With less need to instruct and protect, he begins to explore fulfillment beyond parenting. These explorations are tentative and imperfect, marked by uncertainty rather than confidence. Whether through work, community involvement, or simple companionship, Ben learns to exist as an individual again, not defined solely by responsibility. This rediscovery is portrayed without romanticism, emphasizing that starting over often involves discomfort and self-doubt. Yet, it is precisely this vulnerability that allows Ben to connect more authentically with the world around him. The film also reflects on the cost of ideals, acknowledging that even well-intentioned philosophies can create blind spots. Ben's earlier rigidity, while rooted in love, limited his ability to recognize his children's emotional needs at times. This recognition does not negate his accomplishments, but contextualizes them, offering a more honest portrait of parenthood. The narrative suggests that good intentions are not enough. Growth requires reflection, adaptation, and the courage to admit mistakes. Ben's acceptance of this truth marks one of the most significant developments in his character arc. As the family moves forward, their sense of unity is no longer dependent on proximity or sameness. Distance, both physical and emotional, is acknowledged as a natural part of connection, rather than a threat to it. The children's increasing independence does not weaken their bond with Ben. Instead, it transforms it into something more resilient and respectful. This redefinition of family challenges traditional notions of control and dependency, proposing a model built on trust and mutual respect. The film presents this vision, not as idealistic, but as attainable through effort and openness. Toward the end of this part, the tone settles into quiet confidence. There is no dramatic resolution, no sweeping declaration of success or failure. Instead, the story emphasizes continuity, the idea that life will continue to challenge, surprise, and reshape these characters. What has changed is not the presence of difficulty, but the tools with which it is met. Ben and his children now face the future, equipped with empathy, adaptability, and an understanding that certainty is less valuable than curiosity. By positioning growth as an ongoing journey rather than a completed arc, this chapter reinforces the film's central philosophy. Freedom is not found in rejecting society entirely, nor in surrendering to it without question, but in engaging with it thoughtfully and intentionally. As the family stands on the threshold of what comes next, the story affirms that meaningful lives are built not through isolation or conformity, but through conscious choice, honest connection, and the willingness to evolve. As the narrative enters its final stretch, the emphasis turns toward resolution, without finality, showing how lives settle into patterns while still remaining open to change. This phase of the story does not attempt to tie every thread neatly. Instead, it explores what it means to live with choices once the urgency of crisis has passed. For Ben and his children, stability no longer feels like surrender. It feels earned. The chaos that once defined their transition into the outside world has softened into a rhythm that allows reflection, connection, and quiet growth. Ben's presence within the family has transformed into something gentler and more observant. Where he once acted as a constant guide, he now listens more than he speaks. This change does not stem from detachment, but from trust in the values he helped cultivate, and in his children's ability to navigate complexity. The film uses small, understated moments to communicate this shift. Ben watching rather than intervening, pausing before responding, allowing space for disagreement without correction. These moments underscore the idea that guidance is sometimes most powerful when it is invisible. The children's individuality becomes even more pronounced here, each reflecting a different relationship with the world they have entered. Some display confidence and enthusiasm, embracing structure as a tool rather than a constraint. Others remain cautious, approaching mainstream systems with skepticism but not rejection. The story carefully balances these differences, refusing to frame any path as superior. Instead, it celebrates the diversity of responses as proof that the family's foundation was not conformity, but critical thinking. Their differences do not divide them. They enrich their shared identity. Ben's interactions beyond the family continue to reveal his evolving worldview. He engages with others not as ideological opponents, but as fellow participants in an imperfect system. Conversations that once would have turned confrontational now remain thoughtful and open-ended. This change highlights a key realization. Influence is not achieved through dominance, but through understanding. Ben's willingness to listen does not weaken his convictions. It refines them. The film subtly suggests that maturity is not about certainty, but about curiosity tempered by experience. Memories of Leslie remain woven throughout this section, not as a source of sorrow, but as a quiet guide. Her values persist in the family's respect for learning, empathy, and self-expression. Unlike earlier moments of grief, which were raw and destabilizing, remembrance here feels grounding. The children speak of their mother naturally, without fear or ritual, indicating that loss has been integrated rather than overcome. The narrative treats this evolution with sensitivity, acknowledging that healing does not erase absence, but reshapes its role in daily life. Ben's personal growth becomes more visible as he contemplates his future beyond fatherhood. With his children increasingly independent, he faces the unfamiliar task of redefining purpose. This transition is portrayed as both liberating and unsettling. Ben explores new interests cautiously, aware of how deeply his identity has been tied to responsibility. These explorations are not framed as dramatic reinventions, but as gradual steps toward balance. The film emphasizes that self-discovery does not require abandoning the past, only expanding beyond it. The family's sense of community strengthens during this part, reflecting their ability to engage without losing authenticity. Relationships with others are built on mutual respect, rather than ideological alignment. Differences are acknowledged openly, without the need for resolution. This approach reflects the film's broader message. Coexistence does not require agreement, only empathy. The family's ability to maintain their values, while participating in collective life, serves as a quiet rebuttal to extremes of isolation and assimilation alike. Moments of humor and warmth punctuate this section, offering relief without diminishing depth. These lighter scenes highlight the comfort the family has found in one another and in their environment. Laughter, once a defense against uncertainty, now emerges organically from connection. The film uses these moments to remind viewers that joy is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of understanding. This tonal balance reinforces the sense that the family has reached a place of emotional equilibrium. Ben's reflections on his past choices continue, but they are no longer driven by guilt. Instead, they are informed by clarity. He acknowledges mistakes without allowing them to define him. This self-compassion marks a significant departure from earlier self-criticism, suggesting that growth includes learning how to forgive oneself. The narrative presents this acceptance as essential, not optional, for moving forward. Without it, progress would remain fragile and conditional. The children, to demonstrate this evolving self-awareness, they question, adapt, and reassess their beliefs with confidence rather than fear. Their education, once unconventional and isolating, now proves to be a source of strength, enabling them to engage thoughtfully with diverse perspectives. The film positions this adaptability as the ultimate success of Ben and Leslie's parenting, not the transmission of ideology, but the cultivation of resilience and empathy. As this part draws toward its conclusion, the story settles into a sense of continuity rather than closure. Life moves forward with quiet assurance, marked by routines that feel intentional rather than imposed. The family's journey is not framed as complete, but as ongoing and evolving narrative shaped by choice rather than circumstance. This refusal to finalize reinforces the film's commitment to realism. acknowledging that growth is perpetual. The emotional tone of this chapter is reflective and steady, preparing the ground for the final resolution without forcing it. There are no dramatic turning points here, only accumulated understanding. The film suggests that true transformation often reveals itself not through moments of intensity, but through sustained change over time. Ben and his children embody this truth, standing as individuals shaped by experience, yet open to what lies ahead. In this penultimate stage, the story affirms its central theme with clarity and restraint. Freedom is not defined by rejection or control, but by the ability to choose with awareness. Family is not sustained through authority, but through trust. And growth is not measured by how far one strays from the past, but by how thoughtfully one carries it forward. With these ideas firmly established, the narrative readies itself for its final chapter, one that promises reflection, continuity, and quiet resolution. The final chapter unfolds with a calm confidence, focusing not on dramatic conclusions, but on the quiet certainty that comes from understanding who you are and where you stand. There is no single moment that declares the end of the journey. Instead, the story settles into a space where movement continues, but without urgency. This choice feels intentional, reinforcing the idea that life does not resolve itself in climaxes, but in acceptance. For Ben and his children, the road ahead is no longer something to fear or resist, it is simply something to walk. Ben's role within the family reaches its most balanced form here. He is neither the rigid instructor of the past, nor the uncertain figure questioning every choice. He exists now as a parent who trusts the groundwork laid over years of intention, struggle, and sacrifice. His guidance has shifted fully from instruction to presence. The film communicates this through subtle gestures, shared glances, unspoken understanding, moments where advice is withheld because it is no longer needed. These moments reflect the ultimate success of his parenting, not dependence, but independence grounded in connection. The children, now fully realized as individuals, demonstrate how deeply their upbringing has shaped them without limiting them. Each carries forward a unique interpretation of the values they were taught. Some embrace structure with confidence, others continue to challenge it thoughtfully, but none reject the world outright. Their ability to engage critically without hostility stands as proof that they have not been sheltered from reality, but prepared for it. The narrative resists ranking their choices, presenting all paths as valid expressions of growth. Ben's reflections on Leslie reach a state of peaceful clarity in this final stretch. Her influence is no longer felt as absence or longing, but as a steady presence woven into the family's identity. She exists in the questions the children ask, in their curiosity, in their refusal to accept ideas without examination. The film makes it clear that Leslie's philosophy was never about isolation, it was about intention. In honoring that, the family ensures her legacy is not frozen in grief, but alive in action. A significant portion of this final part focuses on routine, but routine portrayed as freedom rather than confinement. Mornings unfold with structure, days progress with purpose, and responsibilities are met without resentment. This contrast with the family's earlier isolation highlights a central realization. Discipline and freedom are not opposites. When chosen consciously, structure becomes a tool for self-expression rather than control. The film presents this idea gently, without argument, trusting the audience to recognize its truth. Ben's personal journey reaches completion, not through achievement, but through acceptance. He no longer seeks validation for his choices, nor does he measure success by opposition to societal norms. His growth is marked by humility, by the understanding that good intentions do not guarantee perfect outcomes, and that adaptability is as important as conviction. This acceptance does not diminish him, it strengthens him. He emerges as someone who has learned that leadership within a family is not about certainty, but about openness. The family's connection to the wider world feels natural by this point, no longer charged with tension or defensiveness. Interactions with others are built on mutual respect rather than ideological alignment. Differences exist, but they are no longer perceived as threats. This shift reinforces one of the film's most important messages. True integration does not require abandoning identity, it requires confidence in it. The family's values remain intact precisely because they are no longer guarded aggressively. Emotionally, the final moments are restrained yet deeply resonant. The film avoids grand speeches or symbolic gestures, opting instead for ordinary scenes filled with meaning. These moments carry weight because they are earned, grounded in everything that came before. The audience is invited not to witness a conclusion, but to recognize continuity, the sense that life, like growth, does not end neatly, but evolves. As the story approaches its final image, the emphasis is on togetherness, without dependency. The children move forward with their own ambitions, supported, but not directed. Ben stands alongside them, rather than ahead of them. This positioning reflects the core transformation at the heart of the film. The shift from control to trust. It is a quiet but powerful resolution, one that affirms the value of patience, reflection, and emotional honesty. The closing moments encapsulate the film's philosophy with simplicity and grace. Family is shown not as a static unit, but as a living system, one that changes shape without losing its core. The choices made throughout the story have not led to perfection, but to understanding. And in that understanding, there is peace. Ultimately, the film concludes by reaffirming that freedom is not defined by where you live or how you reject the world, but by how thoughtfully you engage with it. Education is not measured by institutions, but by curiosity. And love is not proven through sacrifice alone, but through the willingness to let go when the time comes. With these ideas fully realized, the story ends not with finality, but with quiet confidence, leaving the family exactly where they need to be, grounded, connected, and ready for whatever comes next.